She was abandoned by her own father at age 12. 6 years in a cold orphanage, told she'd never amount to anything. Today, you know her name as Coco Chanel. How did she do it? How did an abandoned orphan girl become the woman who revolutionized fashion forever? How did she turn her pain into power and her shame into success? Everything in this story is true. Every struggle, every secret, and every triumph. Watch the full story to truly understand the journey from nothing to ultimate elegance. Trust me, you won't regret it. This story isn't just inspiring, it's a powerful way to improve your life. Now, let's begin from the very start. In the year 1883, in a small charity hospital in Saumur, France, a baby girl was born to an unmarried couple. Her name was Gabrielle Bonheur Chanel, but life did not welcome her with love or comfort. From the moment she was born, she was surrounded by shame and hardship. Her father, Albert Chanel, was a traveling street vendor who sold women's underwear and small clothing items from village to village. He was never home. He was never reliable. He was a man who lived for himself, not for his family. Her mother, Eugenie Jean Duval, was a poor laundrywoman who spent her days washing clothes for wealthy families. She worked from sunrise to sunset, her hands raw and red from the cold water and harsh soap. But no matter how hard she worked, their earnings were never enough. Gabrielle grew up in extreme poverty. The family lived in a tiny, cramped room with a dirt floor and cracked walls. There was no running water, no heat in winter, and barely enough food to eat. Winters in central France were brutal. Snow blanketed the villages for months, and icy winds tore through their thin walls. Gabrielle and her siblings, 3 sisters and 2 brothers, huddled together for warmth at night, their stomachs empty, their bodies shivering. At a young age, Gabrielle learned that life was not fair. She did not have the pretty dresses that other children had. She did not go to school like them. Instead, she watched her mother slowly dying from exhaustion and poverty. Gabrielle saw how hard her mother worked and how little it mattered. She saw how a woman without money, without a husband's protection, was nothing in society's eyes. This lesson would shape her entire life. But Gabrielle was different from other children in her village. Even though she was poor, even though she had nothing, she had something that others did not: a fierce will to survive. She watched the world around her carefully. She noticed how wealthy women dressed, how they walked, how they carried themselves with confidence. Where were they going? What made them so special? What made them powerful? She had never known such a life, but her heart burned with a desperate hunger to escape her poverty. But fate was not kind to her. When Gabrielle was just 12 years old, her mother fell terribly sick. Tuberculosis, the deadly disease that killed thousands of poor people every year, had taken hold of her frail body. There were no hospitals in their village, no doctors to help them, no money for medicine. Day by day, her mother grew weaker. One cold morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Gabrielle's mother took her last breath. She was gone. Gabrielle stood by her mother's grave, silent, unable to cry. Her world had collapsed. Everything she knew was gone, but the worst was yet to come. After her mother's death, Gabrielle's father faced a choice. He could stay and raise his 5 children alone, or he could abandon them and continue his wandering life. For Albert Chanel, the choice was easy. He wanted his freedom. He wanted to escape responsibility. One by one, he got rid of his children. The 2 boys were sent to work on farms as cheap labor. The 3 girls, Gabrielle, Julia Berthe, and Antoinette, were taken to a remote place far from any town. It was the Congregation of the Sacred Heart of Mary, a Catholic orphanage in the village of Aubazine. The building was cold, gray, and forbidding. High stone walls surrounded it like a prison. Albert Chanel walked his daughters to the heavy wooden door, knocked, and when the nuns answered, he simply turned and walked away. He never looked back. He never visited. He never sent a letter. He abandoned them completely. For 12-year-old Gabrielle, it felt like the end of the world. She had lost her mother. Now she had lost her father too. She was an orphan, unwanted and forgotten. Life in the Aubazine orphanage was harsh and strict. The building was massive and cold, with long, dark corridors and stone floors that froze in winter. The girls slept in a large dormitory with rows of narrow iron beds. There was no privacy, no comfort, no warmth. Every morning, they were woken before dawn by the ringing of bells. They dressed in rough, plain uniforms, black dresses with white collars, simple and severe. The nuns who ran the orphanage believed in discipline, obedience, and hard work. There was no laughter, no play, no freedom. The girls spent their days in silence. They attended mass multiple times a day, praying for hours on their knees on the cold stone floors. They learned to read and write, but only the basics. Education was not considered important for poor girls. But there was one skill the nuns taught them that would change Gabrielle's life forever: sewing. The orphans were trained to sew, mend, and embroider. They made clothes for the church, repaired linens, and stitched altar cloths. Gabrielle's small hands worked the needle for hours every day. At first, she hated it. The work was tedious and her fingers bled from the rough fabric. But slowly, she became skilled. She learned to create neat, perfect stitches. She learned how fabric moved, how it could be shaped and transformed. Years passed slowly in the orphanage. Gabrielle was trapped there from age 12 to 18, 6 long years of her young life. She watched the seasons change through the high, narrow windows. She walked the same stone corridors every day, following the same routine, year after year. Many girls accepted their fate. They believed they would leave the orphanage only to become servants or marry poor men and live lives of poverty just like their mothers. But Gabrielle was different. She refused to accept this future. Inside her, a fire burned. She hated the orphanage. She hated the poverty. She hated being powerless. But most of all, she hated the shame. Society looked down on orphans. They were seen as worthless, as children no one wanted. Gabrielle vowed that one day, she would escape this place. One day, she would become someone important. One day, she would make the world remember her name. But she had no idea how. She had no money, no family, no connections. She had nothing but her will to survive. The orphanage had taught her one important thing, though: how to hide her emotions, how to appear strong even when she was broken inside, how to survive in a world that did not care about her. These lessons would serve her for the rest of her life. When Gabrielle turned 18, she was too old to stay at the orphanage. The nuns arranged for her to move to a boarding house in Moulins, a small town in central France. The boarding house was run by nuns and housed young women who worked as seamstresses and shop assistants. It was not freedom, but it was better than the orphanage. Gabrielle found work as a seamstress in a small shop, sewing simple dresses and mending clothes for local customers. The pay was terrible. She barely earned enough to buy food. She lived in a tiny room with other working girls, sharing one bed, one wash basin, and one small wardrobe. The work was exhausting, but Gabrielle was determined to survive. But she wanted more than survival. She wanted a better life. She wanted to escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped her mother and killed her. At night, after long days of sewing, Gabrielle and some of the other girls would go to a local café called La Rotonde. It was a simple place where soldiers, travelers, and young people gathered. There was music, laughter, and life. Gabrielle, despite her shyness, began performing as a singer. She had a pleasant voice, and she sang popular songs of the time. Her favorite songs were Quoi Vu Coco and Coco Rico, simple, catchy tunes. The crowd loved them. Night after night, they would shout for her to sing Coco, Coco, and slowly, the nickname stuck. Gabrielle became Coco. The name Coco had different meanings. Some said it was a term of endearment from the soldiers who frequented the café. Others whispered that it came from cocotte, a French slang word for a woman who entertained men for money, a polite way of saying prostitute. Whether Coco knew this or not, she embraced the name. It was a way to leave Gabrielle, the poor orphan girl, behind. Coco was someone new, someone bold, someone who could reinvent herself. But singing in cafes would not make her rich. Coco knew that. She needed something more. She needed a way into the world of wealth and power. And she knew there was only one way for a poor woman with no education and no family to rise in society. She needed a wealthy man. In Milan, Coco met a man who would change her life. His name was Chen Balsan, a wealthy ex-cavalry officer from a rich family. He was charming, confident, and bored with conventional life. He was attracted to Coco's sharp wit, her sarcasm, and her refusal to act like other women. She was different. She was honest. She didn't pretend to be innocent or naive. Balsan invited Coco to live with him at his Chateau Royale near Campigny. It was a luxurious estate with vast gardens, stables full of expensive horses, and rooms filled with art and fine furniture. For Coco, it was like stepping into a dream. She, the orphan girl who had slept on a hard bed in a freezing dormitory, was now living in a palace. But Coco was not content to simply be Balsan's mistress. She was too proud, too ambitious for that. She watched the wealthy women who visited Royale, the aristocrats and socialites who wore elaborate hats decorated with feathers, flowers, and ribbons. The hats were enormous, heavy, and impractical, but they were fashionable. They were status symbols. Coco had an idea. She began making her own hats, simple designs that were elegant and easy to wear. She used her sewing skills from the orphanage, but she added something new, a sense of style. Her hats were different. They were clean, modern, and understated. Balsan's wealthy friends noticed. They began asking Coco to make hats for them. But Balsan did not take Coco's ambitions seriously. He saw her as his lover, his companion, not as a businesswoman. This frustrated Coco. She knew she needed more than his affection. She needed financial support and independence. Then she met Arthur Boy Capel. Capel was a wealthy English businessman, handsome, intelligent, and ambitious. He was also Balsan's friend. When Capel met Coco, he was immediately captivated. He saw something in her that others didn't. Potential. He saw that she was not just a mistress, but a woman with vision, talent, and determination. He believed in her. Coco left Balsan and became Capel's lover. But this time, the relationship was different. Capel didn't just support her financially. He invested in her dreams. He gave her money to open her first shop, a small hat boutique in Paris at 21 Rue Cambon. It was 1910, and Coco was 27 years old. For the first time in her life, she had her own business. She had her own identity. She was no longer just an orphan, a seamstress, or a mistress. She was Coco Chanel, hat maker. Coco's hat shop, Chanel Modes, was an immediate success. Her designs were revolutionary. While other milliners created hats that were elaborate and heavy, Coco's hats were simple, elegant, and modern. They were easy to wear and made women look chic without trying too hard. Her clients were wealthy, fashionable women who appreciated her unique style. But Coco wanted more. She wanted to design clothes, not just hats. She opened a boutique in the resort town of Deauville on the coast of Normandy, a place where wealthy Parisians spent their summers. There, Coco began creating simple sportswear for women, loose sweaters, comfortable skirts, and practical jackets. This was radical. At the time, women's fashion was restrictive and uncomfortable. Women wore tight corsets that squeezed their bodies, long heavy skirts that dragged on the ground, and elaborate dresses that required hours to put on. Fashion was about showing wealth and status, not about comfort or practicality. But Coco had a different vision. She remembered the harsh, simple uniforms from the orphanage, black and white, plain and functional. She remembered how uncomfortable poverty was, how exhausting it was to struggle with heavy clothes while trying to survive. She wanted to create fashion that was elegant but comfortable, stylish but practical. She wanted women to feel free. Coco began using jersey fabric, a stretchy, comfortable material that was traditionally used for men's underwear. No one had ever used jersey for women's fashion, but Coco didn't care. She designed simple dresses and skirts in jersey, and women loved them. They were soft, easy to move in, and modern. Coco was changing fashion. Then came World War I. The war changed everything. Men went to fight, and women had to work. They took jobs in factories, drove ambulances, and ran businesses. They needed practical clothes that allowed them to move freely. Coco's designs were perfect for this new reality. Her simple, comfortable clothes became incredibly popular. Coco opened another shop in Biarritz, another wealthy resort town. Business was booming. She was becoming famous. But her personal life was falling apart. In 1919, Arthur Capel, the man who had believed in her and supported her dreams, died in a car accident. Coco was devastated. Capel had been the love of her life. His death left a hole in her heart that would never be filled. But Coco did not stop. She couldn't. She had come too far. She threw herself into her work with even more intensity. She created more designs, opened more shops, and built her empire. She was no longer just a designer. She was becoming a brand. In 1921, Coco created something that would change the world of luxury forever: Chanel No. 5. At the time, perfumes were simple, single-note scents, usually floral, rose, jasmine, or violet. Coco wanted something different. She wanted a perfume that smelled like a woman, not like a flower. She wanted something complex, mysterious, and unforgettable. She worked with a perfumer named Ernest Beau, and together they created Chanel No. 5, a blend of over 80 different scents. It was revolutionary. The perfume was elegant, sophisticated, and modern. It came in a simple, minimalist bottle with clean lines, very different from the ornate, decorative perfume bottles of the time. Chanel No. 5 became an instant success. It was unlike anything the world had seen before. It was not just a perfume. It was a statement. It represented everything Coco believed in: elegance, simplicity, and modernity. Today, Chanel No. 5 is still one of the most famous perfumes in the world. A bottle is sold every 30 seconds somewhere on the planet. Then, in 1926, Coco created another iconic piece, the little black dress. Before Coco, black was considered a color of mourning. Women wore black only to funerals or when a family member died. Black was associated with death, sadness, and poverty. But Coco saw black differently. She saw it as elegant, timeless, and versatile. She designed a simple black dress with clean lines and a modest length. It was made from jersey fabric, comfortable and easy to wear. The dress was featured in Vogue magazine, which called it Chanel's Ford, comparing it to the Model T car: simple, affordable, and accessible to everyone. The little black dress became a revolution. Suddenly, every woman wanted one. It was a dress that could be worn to work, to dinner, or to a party. It was elegant, versatile, and timeless. The little black dress became a staple of women's fashion, and it remains so today, nearly 100 years later. By the 1920s and 1932, Coco Chanel had become one of the most famous and influential women in the world. She didn't just design clothes. She changed the way women lived. She freed them from corsets and heavy fabrics. She gave them comfortable, elegant clothes that allowed them to move, work, and live freely. She made fashion modern. But Coco Chanel's story is not all triumph and success. There is a dark chapter in her life, one she tried desperately to hide for decades. When World War II broke out in 1939, Coco closed her fashion house. She claimed it was out of patriotism, but the truth was more complicated. When Nazi Germany occupied France in 1940, Coco did something shocking. She moved into the Ritz Hotel in Paris, which had been taken over by the German military as their headquarters. There, she began a love affair with a German officer named Baron Hans-G. Enther von Dinklage, a man who worked for German intelligence. While France suffered under Nazi occupation, while Jewish families were being arrested and sent to concentration camps, Coco lived comfortably in the Ritz, enjoying the protection of her German lover. She was not punished like other French women who had relationships with German soldiers. She was protected. But it was worse than just a love affair. In 2011, historian Hal Vaughan published a book revealing shocking documents. Coco Chanel had been a Nazi spy. She had been given the code name Westminster and had worked for German intelligence. She had even participated in a mission to carry messages between the Germans and the British, hoping to negotiate a separate peace deal. Even more shocking, Coco tried to use Nazi laws to steal her own perfume business. Chanel No.5 had been financed by Jewish business partners, the Wertheimer family, who owned the majority of the company. Under Nazi-occupied France's anti-Semitic laws, Jewish property could be seized and Aryanized, given to non-Jews. Coco tried to use these laws to take full control of her perfume business, arguing that her Jewish partners should lose their shares. Fortunately, the Wertheimers had already fled to America and had legally transferred ownership to a non-Jewish friend, protecting their business. When the war ended, they reclaimed their shares. Coco's attempt to steal from them had failed. When Paris was liberated in 1944, many French women who had relationships with German soldiers were publicly humiliated, their heads shaved, and they were paraded through the streets. But Coco faced no such punishment. She had powerful friends. Some say Winston Churchill himself intervened to protect her. Others say she made deals with the French authorities. Whatever the reason, Coco escaped punishment. But her reputation was destroyed. The French public despised her. Her name became associated with collaboration and betrayal. Coco left France and went into exile in Switzerland, where she lived for nearly a decade, far from the fashion world she had once ruled. For years, Coco lived in Switzerland, isolated and forgotten. She was in her 70s, and most people thought her career was over. The fashion world had moved on. New designers had taken her place. Christian Dior's new look, with its full skirts and cinched waists, had become the dominant style. It was everything Coco hated: restrictive, uncomfortable, and impractical. But Coco could not stay away. Fashion was her life. It was her identity. In 1954, at the age of 71, Coco Chanel made a stunning decision. She would return to Paris and reopen her fashion house. Many people laughed. They thought she was too old, too out of touch, too disgraced. The French press mocked her. They wrote cruel reviews of her first collection, calling it outdated and irrelevant. But Coco didn't care about the French press. She cared about women. She believed that women still needed comfortable, elegant clothes. She believed that Dior's restrictive designs were a step backward. And she was right. While the French critics dismissed her, American women loved her. American buyers placed huge orders for her designs. American magazines featured her clothes on their covers. Slowly, Coco's reputation was rebuilt. By the 1960s, she was once again one of the most famous designers in the world. She introduced the iconic Chanel suit, a tailored jacket with a straight skirt, often in tweed, with gold buttons and chain trim. It was elegant, comfortable, and timeless. Women around the world wanted one. She also created the Chanel 2.55 handbag in 1955, one of the most iconic handbags in fashion history. It was designed with a chain strap so women could wear it over their shoulder, freeing their hands. The interior was burgundy, like the uniforms at the orphanage where Coco grew up. Even in success, echoes of her painful past remained. Coco continued working until the very end of her life. At age 87, she was still designing, still overseeing her collections, still perfecting every detail. On January 10, 1971, Coco Chanel died in her suite at the Ritz Hotel in Paris, the same hotel where she had lived during the Nazi occupation. She died alone, but she died as a legend. After Coco's death, the Chanel brand could have disappeared. Many fashion houses die with their founders, but Chanel survived. The Wertheimer family, the Jewish business partners Coco had tried to betray during the war, still owned the company. They had forgiven her betrayal and had worked with her during her comeback. Now they controlled the entire brand. For years, Chanel struggled without Coco. The designs were uninspired, and the brand seemed lost. But in 1983, the Wertheimers made a brilliant decision. They hired Karl Lagerfeld as the creative director. Lagerfeld was a German designer, brilliant, eccentric, and endlessly creative. He understood Coco's vision: elegance, simplicity, and modernity. But Lagerfeld didn't just copy Coco's designs. He modernized them. He took Coco's classic elements, the tweed suits, the quilted handbags, the interlocking CC logo, and made them fresh and exciting. He turned Chanel into a fashion powerhouse once again. Under Lagerfeld's leadership, Chanel became one of the most profitable and influential luxury brands in the world. Lagerfeld worked for Chanel for 36 years, from 1983 until his death in 2019. He created hundreds of collections, each one more spectacular than the last. He turned Chanel fashion shows into legendary events, transforming runways into rocket ships, icebergs, and gardens. He made Chanel relevant to new generations. After Lagerfeld's death, Virginie Viard, who had worked closely with him for decades, took over as creative director. She continues to honor Coco's legacy while bringing her own vision to the brand. Today, Chanel is a privately owned company, still controlled by the Wertheimer family. It is estimated to be worth over $20 billion, making it one of the most valuable fashion brands in the world. Today, Chanel represents more than just fashion. It represents timeless elegance. Chanel's designs are not trendy. They are classic. A Chanel suit from 1960 still looks elegant today. Female empowerment. Coco freed women from restrictive fashion and gave them clothes that allowed them to be powerful, independent, and comfortable. Luxury and exclusivity. Chanel products are expensive and exclusive. Owning a Chanel handbag, a bottle of Chanel No.5, or a Chanel suit is a status symbol, a sign of sophistication and success. Iconic products, from the little black dress to the Chanel 2.55 handbag to Chanel No.5 perfume, the brand has created products that have become cultural icons. Even after 50 years since Coco's death, Chanel remains one of the most powerful and influential brands in the world. And it all started with one orphan girl who refused to accept her fate. Coco Chanel's story is a lesson in resilience, reinvention, and the refusal to be defined by your past. From an abandoned orphan in a harsh convent to the most influential fashion designer in history, Coco Chanel proved that your beginning does not determine your ending. She was born into poverty and shame. She was abandoned by her father. She spent 6 years in a cold, harsh orphanage. She had no education, no money, no family. Society told her she was worthless, but she refused to believe it. Coco learned to use her pain as fuel. The simple, austere uniforms of the orphanage became the inspiration for her clean, elegant designs. The shame of being an orphan became the motivation to create a new identity. The poverty of her childhood became the reason to build an empire. But Coco's story is also a reminder that success does not erase all flaws. She was brilliant, talented, and visionary. She was also ruthless, opportunistic, and deeply flawed. Her collaboration with the Nazis remains a dark stain on her legacy. Her attempt to betray her Jewish business partners was unforgivable. Her willingness to do whatever it took to survive and succeed came at a moral cost. Yet, despite her flaws, Coco Chanel's impact on the world is undeniable. She changed fashion forever. She gave women freedom and elegance. She created products that have become cultural icons. She built a brand that has lasted for over a century and will likely last for many more. Every step, from sewing in the orphanage to creating billion-dollar perfumes, was built on determination and the refusal to give up. And even after wars, scandals, and battles for control, Chanel has stood the test of time. This is more than a brand. It's a legacy. This is the story of Coco Chanel, the orphan girl who became a legend, who turned her shame into power, and who proved that no matter where you start, you can create your own destiny.